everyone, I'm Crystal Diff, Program Coordinator with History Services.
And I'm Bill McDonald, Adult Services Librarian with Charlotte County Libraries and History. And welcome to What's in a Name, where Crystal and I look at names of streets and places and give you the historical background.
Yeah, so the first one that I'm going to talk about today is a Klein Road, which is in Punta Gorda. It's actually named after the Atlantic Coastline Railroad, or the AC line. So they just kind of shoved that all together and turned it into one word, a Klein. And it runs between Taylor and Burnt Store roads over in Punta Gorda. But in 1902, the Atlantic Coastline Railroad took over for the Florida Southern Railroad that was in Punta Gorda, which first entered there in 1886. And at that point, Punta Gorda was the southernmost stop on the railroad lines. But after a period of time, they ended up extending the line into Fort Myers. There was once a town over in that area named Klein where all the railroad workers would live. They ended up having their families move in, they expanded the town, they had a sawmill and things like that over in the town. In 1928, the Punta Gorda train depot was built by the Atlantic Coastline, and it still remains open to this day over in Punta Gorda as a museum. So you can still enter that. It's over on Taylor Street. The railroad line was extended and changed hands over time, but it's actually still in use today with the CSX railroad. So you can actually still see a train go down the same railroad tracks that the Atlantic Coastline Railway used at the beginnings of Punta Gorda and all the railroad lines in that area.
Sally Jones Elementary School is named after Sally Jones, and Sally Jones' main distinction is that she was the first female superintendent of schools in Florida, not just Charlotte County, but Florida. But her real notoriety first came as a high school student when she won Most Popular. She actually won a popularity contest. It was sponsored by a drugstore in Punta Gorda. And I remember when I was in middle school and I was chatting with some friends before class began, and the teacher told me to go back to my seat and told me it wasn't a popularity contest. And I wished I could have said, well, Sally Jones won a popularity contest and she went on to become the first female superintendent of schools, and I wish I could have contributed that, but of course I didn't know that at the time. In 1927, Sally Jones was one of the first teachers in the Charlotte High School that opened to the public in 1927, and she taught science and English, and her main accomplishments as superintendent of schools is she established the first school lunchroom, where she actually designated a place where students and school faculty could have lunch. And she also established that all teachers in Charlotte County needed to be professionally certified. So she contributed a lot, and she is one of the founding school teachers and educators in Charlotte County history.
Yeah, we're very lucky to have her and her legacy here. So the next one I'm going to talk about is the Tamiami Trail. Now, most of you have gone down Tamiami Trail, or US 41, and it gets its name from combining two towns, Tampa and Miami, which the road actually connects. So the Tamiami Trail is the last 275 miles of US Highway 41, and this reaches all the way from Miami to Michigan. I'm not sure if anybody's traveled that on their own from Miami to Michigan. The Tamiami Trail officially opened in April 26, 1928, after 13 years of construction. And it was largely due to the backing of Baron Collier that this was completed. And he also helped build the Baron Collier Bridge over Charlotte Harbor, which is on Tamiami Trail. And that was built in 1931, and that is over Charlotte Harbor, and that's the northbound lane. The section of the road that runs from Charlotte County, or runs through Charlotte County, that's part of the Tamiami Trail, was once just a dirt road that was running south near the railroad station in Murdoch. There was once a railroad station over on the corner of Tamiami Trail and 776. The Murdoch train station was over there. So first, people were just using it to get over to that area on just dirt track. Another fun fact is work on the trail used up a boxcar worth of dynamite every 3 weeks for a year, which made Florida the third highest consumer in dynamite for the nation in 1927. That's pretty crazy.
That's crazy, yeah. And Cooper Street is named after F.M. Cooper, or Frank Cooper. And the gentleman, Mr. Cooper, wore many hats. He was a farmer. He also was a skilled fisherman and boater and mariner. He also owned and operated a hardware store in Punta Gorda. And he also became state senator from this area. And one of the main things that F.M. Cooper pushed for was the idea of a separate county for Punta Gorda, Charlotte Harbor, and the Cleveland area. And he stressed that this being a separate county, breaking apart from the very large DeSoto County, would allow citizens in Punta Gorda and Charlotte Harbor to earmark certain projects, certain benefits, and certain buildings that would benefit this area. And of course, in 1913, it became abundantly clear to a lot of citizens in Punta Gorda that this wasn't always the case for the residents in terms of their tax dollars. And that instance was when they found out that DeSoto commissioners were spending $104,000 to construct a courthouse in Arcadia. And this elaborate courthouse, this ornate building, was partially funded by the taxpayers in Punta Gorda because they belonged to DeSoto County. And they felt, why should our taxpayers' dollars go to this elaborate building when we can't even get a bridge across Charlotte Harbor? So this idea of separatists, a separate county, in fact, they even had the name separatist, it began really taking hold here in Punta Gorda and Charlotte Harbor. F.M. Cooper did lose his initial re-election and was defeated, but he did come back and was re-elected in 1920. And by that time, for the last 7 years, from 1913 to 1920, the separatist movement had would gain support and lose support. And it was going back and forth. By 1920, F.M. Cooper was pretty instrumental in getting some legislators, state legislatures and state senators to support the idea of breaking up DeSoto County into 5 separate counties. And one of those, of course, being Charlotte County. And to gain the governor's support, it was Kerry Hardy, they named one of the counties Hardy County. Now, I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall when Governor Hardy came in and said, well, so gentlemen, what's going on? Well, we think we might break up DeSoto into 5 counties. Well, I don't know about that. Well, Governor Hardy, we might name one of the counties Hardy County. And they'd say, boys, talk to me about this. So I don't know if that really went on, but it was a very, I think, strategic move to get the governor's support by naming one of the counties Hardy County. And of course, in 1921, Charlotte County comes into existence. And here we are 100 years later, celebrating Charlotte County's centennial. And when you're on Cooper Street, maybe reflect that this gentleman, F.M. Cooper, was really instrumental in the idea of Charlotte being a separate county. And we have him to partially thank.
And this is one of the programs of our centennial this year.
Exactly.
All right, so my last one is on Frizzell Road in El Jabin, which is off of Warren Avenue, and it's actually close to the Frizzell Fire Tower that's over there as well in El Jabin, off of State Road 776. There's also a Frizzell Lane in Port Charlotte off of southbound Tamiami Trail near the Murdoch Administration Building in Port Charlotte. So Arthur Cleveland, or AC, and Patty Frizzell, they came to this area in 1918 and started off as telegraph and station agents at the Murdoch Train Depot for the Charlotte Harbor and Northern Railroad. So all of my street names and places today kind of come together in the end. They were fired from their jobs not even a year after because AC was caught tending to his garden instead of tending to the station. So they were both fired because of this. And so luckily they were able to start buying off some plots of land around in the area. It was very cheap to own land over there at the time. But honestly, getting fired from their jobs was the best thing to happen to them. They invested in the land. They bought what was left of the failed town of Murdoch at the time, and then they just continued to keep adding to it. They tapped the pine trees that were very plentiful on their land for turpentine. He ran his own turpentine camps, and some of those towns can even still be seen on old maps. One of his camps was Mars, and it was considered a town. That's how big it was. Then after the turpentine was sapped from the trees, he cut down the trees and he sold the lumber. And once there was nothing on the land, he added cattle and turned it into farmland. So he was very successful, or they were both very successful at this. They ended up owning a lot of businesses and racking up over 80,000 acres of land. So that's a lot of land. After Patty's death, though, the whole institution just started crumbling. It said that she could do the work of 5 other people, so really she was the brains behind this operation. So she died in 1953, and then AC sold most of his land, keeping only about 40 acres for himself in Port Charlotte only a year later. Of course, this made way for development companies. So we have General Development Corporation and the Mackles, who came in and started developing this area and turned it into what we know today as Port Charlotte. So basically everywhere you go in Port Charlotte, from out from El Jabin over through into Charlotte Harbor areas, it could have been Frizzell land that you were on. There's a lot of development happened right after the selling of that land. The first homes started to be built in the 1950s. So without AC Frizzell and Patty Frizzell gaining all of that land and making such a big enterprise for themselves, we wouldn't have basically half of our Charlotte County, a very big part of Charlotte County.
Absolutely. And Crystal, of course, you mentioned AC Frizzell and General Development. And the last street that I'm looking at, last name is Elcam. And that is Mackle spelled backwards. And the Mackles were the Mackle brothers, and they were the principal land developers in the Charlotte County. In fact, you mentioned AC Frizzell had about 80,000 acres that he sold directly to the Mackle brothers for about $3.6 million, and this is 1954, so that's a great financial windfall. Unfortunately, AC, I think, died in 1961, so he had roughly 6 or 7 years to have a great run in terms of the profit that he netted on that sale. Of course, he kept about 40 acres, AC kept about 40 acres to himself, and that area I believe is around where the Days Inn on Port Charlotte is located, and that's pretty close to the Mid-County Library where we're doing this video right now. The Mackle brothers, of course, takes over the land that they had purchased from AC Frizzell, and they began developing houses. The first homes came up on Easy Street. They were modest 2-bedroom homes. And of course, they advertised nationally, and their big slogan was $10 down, $10 a month. They advertised on radio and in the newspapers and in magazines, and they really targeted the Midwest and the eastern states. Many people that bought Mackle Homes and Lots did it through the mail order. But there was actual homes, model homes, right very close to Elcam, of course, which is Mackle spelled backwards. And in a short time, 25,000 lots were sold. And of course, the Mackle brothers were instrumental in developing the cultural center and many other places around here. They came up with the name Northport, which is what they consider Northport Charlotte. And they went to develop other cities in Florida, such as Port St. Lucie, Marco Island, and in those locations they also have an Elcam or Mackle spelled backwards. Yeah. Of course, the name Mackle became really well known in the news in 1968 when Robert Mackle's daughter Barbara Mackle was kidnapped when she was a student at Emory University. This was about a week or two before Christmas in 1968. And her kidnappers, Gary Stephen Christ and Ruth Eisman Shire, had placed her underground in a capsule, and she was there for about 83 hours. She was rescued by the FBI, and she made an immediate and very healthy recovery. And the principal kidnapper, Gary Stephen Christ, was apprehended here in Charlotte County, and he was captured in Hog Island, which is right close to El Jobin. And Barbara Mackle went on to write a book, and the person that inspired her to write a book about her experiences of being kidnapped was none other than Richard M. Nixon, or President Nixon. Nixon was a friend of the Mackle family. He stayed in Marco Island, and he convinced Barbara to write her book. That book became the subject and inspiration for two television movies, one in the 70s and one in the 90s. And in fact, we did a production as well a couple of years ago when you played Barbara Mackle.
Yes.
And I played Gary Stephen Christ. So you played the hero and I played the villain. So the hero got most respect, but the villain was a lot of fun too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But they, as Crystal had mentioned before, along with A.C. Frizzell, the Mackle brothers and A.C. Frizzell were really, in many ways, the founding fathers of modern Port Charlotte. Yeah. And here we are many years later. And I think what would A.C. Frizzell and the Mackle brothers think of Port Charlotte now with over 55,000 people? You know, how would they conceive that?
Yeah, I think they would just be astonished with the amount of development, especially recently, that's been happening in our area.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Pretty amazing. Yep, all of this was cow pastures.
That's right, yes. I mean, if before 54, before that sale from Frizzell to the Mackle brothers of the 80,000 acres, that area was just ranch land.
Yep.
It's hard to believe.
Yeah. We have aerials of it too, so if you're ever interested, you can go into the online collections, which is in the library catalog. You can just use the drop-down menu, go to archives, and just look up Port Charlotte, and you can see all the aerials over different periods of time, and pictures of the development over time in our area. So yeah, it's really neat to see how that's expanded as time progresses.
Absolutely. And stay with us through the Centennial. We'll have many great videos to come.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.